This was a Monday night. I'd gotten out of work at 8 and went straight home to hop online and game with some of my buddies. I had gotten divorced a few months ago, which left me with just an empty house and not much to do outside of work. So gaming with my friends all night was mostly all I did, and I can't say I didn't enjoy it. Anyway, I knew there was supposed to be a big thunderstorm overnight, and there were even flash flood warnings. But around here, they pretty much send out those warnings every time it rains, so it was never a big deal. At about 11 p.m. though, I was in the middle of a game with my buddies when a sudden massive gust of wind slammed against the window next to me, and the entire house shook. I took my headset halfway off, and I could hear rain pouring down, and the house creaking and swaying violently. I turned back to my screen to tell everyone what was going on, but suddenly my screen and all the lights in my house flicked off for a split second, then right back on. I saw I was still in the Discord call, so I asked if they could still hear me, but before I got an answer, everything cut out. My PC shut down, and all the lights snapped off. The whole house was dark. I couldn't even see my hands in front of my face. I felt around my desk for my phone, then turned the light on. Annoyed, I got up and walked downstairs and up to the front window. Honestly, it was hard to say if everyone else's power was off or not. I could barely see anything through the flood of rain that was pouring down, and most people's houses would usually be dark by now anyways, since it was so late. I quickly sent a message in the group chat saying I probably wouldn't be on for the rest of the night. Frustrated, I used my little phone light to find my way to the basement. I went down and found my old battery bank. It wasn't much, but it was enough to plug a few lamps into so I could at least have some light. I grabbed it and started walking back up to the stairs when I thought I heard something behind me. It was just a bunch of boxes back there, but the wind seemed to pick up as soon as I turned around, so I assumed it was just the storm making the house make noises. I hauled the battery bank up to the first floor and plugged in one of the lamps in the living room. I'm not sure if this is normal or not, but I hated going to bed with the power out. Like I had to wait for it to come back on before I'd feel comfortable sleeping. So I opened up the blinds and sat on the couch, then took my phone out and used my data to scroll through YouTube. An hour or so went by before I got curious again, and this time opened the front door to look outside. My porch had an overhang that blocked most of the rain, so I stepped out and looked around. The storm was still raging on, but the houses across the street didn't seem to be off power. At least a couple of them had a light or two on in the windows. Now I was pretty confused. I looked up outages in my area, but didn't find much info. I went back inside. Oddly, only a minute later, I got a text. It was from a normal, unknown phone number, but essentially said that there was down power lines and to expect power outages. I had no clue why I got a direct text though, and the number didn't have an ID, like from ComEd or whatever. Strange, I thought, but I didn't look much more into it. I went back to the couch. Again, I was on my phone, but more so to just listen to videos while I watched the storm out the window. But then, I heard something from the other side of the house. It sounded exactly like a footstep on one of the creaky wooden steps to the basement. I'd lived here long enough to recognize that sound. I got up, but walked slowly and quietly over there, wanting to hear if it happened again. The house was so dark, and my phone light only lit up a small view in front of me. I turned the corner into the hallway and shined the light down. Nothing was there. However, the basement door was open, like wide open, and there was no way I left it like that. I walked up and shined the light down the stairs, but there was no way I was going to go down there to check anything out. not with no power on. I closed the door. I don't think I had enough time to really think about what this really meant. I walked into the next room. Light from the thunderstorm flashed in the windows, but when I looked around, I found nothing. A feeling built up in me, though, like something was off, and my gut could sense it. I started to walk back, when suddenly heavy footsteps came running up the basement stairs. Even behind the closed door, they were loud and shook the whole floor. Without thinking, I ran up to the door and slammed my body against it. Not even a second later, they were on the other side trying to open it. Once they figured out I was there, they started hitting it and ramming their shoulder into it to try to force the door open. This was a regular basement door, so it had no lock on it. I didn't know what else to do. He pounded against it for a minute, but when I pulled my phone out and started calling 911, he stopped. I heard his footsteps go back down the stairs, and I took this chance to get in my car and leave. I tried to watch from the other side of the road to see if he left, but during the 10 minutes I waited, I didn't see anything. 3 officers went in and found nobody inside. He had left through the back door. What I find most disturbing about this situation is that we confirmed the text I received about the power outage was fake, like from a private personal phone. So whoever this guy was that broke in, he knew enough about me to find my phone number. He wasn't targeting just some random house. We think he texted me once he heard me go outside, probably knowing I was checking if other houses had power, and wanting me to not get suspicious and check the breaker box in the basement. There was no outage. He had shut off my power. That's about where it was left, though. No new info on who it could have been or what they wanted has been found out. I was going on a camping trip with my best friend. I'm gonna call him Henry. We'd done a few trips before, but we still mostly considered ourselves new to it. We hadn't done anything too crazy up until this point. Usually we'd go to local campgrounds that had other people around, but we thought we were confident enough to do something more adventurous. Both of us wanted to camp at an actual campsite that was cool, with a view and further in the forest. You know, like real camping. We did some research and found a place about 3 hours from us. It was a 4-hour hike into the forest, and it only had a couple pictures from previous campers, so it didn't seem like it'd be busy. We drove down there, prepared for 3 days. There was a very small dirt area on the end of an otherwise unused road in the middle of the forest. Nobody else was parked there. The trail looked like an actual trail, or at least it looked like it was one at some point. It hadn't been kept up with, so some parts were overgrown and weathered. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere, it seemed, so I wasn't expecting the most taken care of trail, but this looked like it was abandoned for years. Still, we kept walking. It thinned out as we got further into the forest, but around mid-afternoon, we got to the campsite. It was no more than a grassy area on top of a small hill, but it had a decent overlook of the forest, and was very secluded. Nobody else was there, and from the looks of it, nobody had been there in a long time. We set up our tents and got everything unpacked. Henry was taking a bit longer than me, so while I waited, I walked up to the overlook and just enjoyed the view. While I was there, I noticed something move in the trees below us. It was really hard to see through the dense branches and leaves, but I barely caught a glimpse of a group of people walking, maybe 4 or 5 of them. I was so surprised to see other people out here, especially not on a campsite. From where I was, though, I couldn't see anything aside from their basic figures moving through the forest, so I couldn't tell if they were campers or hikers or what. I tried to point them out to Henry, but by the time he came over, they were already gone, disappeared in the forest. After a few minutes, we were back to going about our day. We kind of just hung out for the next few hours, talking and whatever, until the sun started going down. We built up a small campfire and sat around it. The night was calm for the first couple hours. It was quiet, only the sound of us talking and the crackling campfire between us. But then we heard something else. It was faint, but we both heard it. It sounded like voices, multiple, talking back and forth. We couldn't tell what they were saying, or even if they were speaking our language. It was coming from way out in the trees though, which made it really creepy. Henry and I didn't know what to do, so we just listened for a bit, but the voices didn't seem to move. They stayed in the same spot out there, until they suddenly went quiet. The next minute or so was really unnerving. We didn't hear the voices fade out or leave. They just stopped, like they were still right out there. Then there were footsteps, just one set walking toward us. A few seconds later, a man came out of the dark and into the light of our campfire. He had a distinct red baseball cap and longish wavy black hair. His smile was wide as he walked up to us. "Either of you know where the trail is around here? I've been looking for a while." I said yeah, and pointed ahead at the trail. But when he didn't immediately say anything or leave, I then asked if the others out there were with him. His face fell flat for a moment. Then he smiled again and looked back at where I was looking. "I didn't know there were others out here. I've just been hiking alone. I would have asked them for directions if I saw them," the man said. He was really strange though. I was almost sure he was lying. He came from the same direction we just heard the voices in. I just said okay, and he smiled, then left and went down the trail. Henry was thinking the exact same thing as I was, that the guy was lying for some reason. There was no way he just came out from the same area as the group of voices and wasn't with them, or at least didn't even notice them. But the more unsettling question is, why was he lying? Why didn't he want to tell us about the others in the forest? We discussed this around the campfire for a while, maybe 30 minutes, trying to figure out what the hell was going on, or if there even was something going on. The whole time, it felt like we were being watched. I kept turning around and looking at the forest and at the trail. Something felt wrong. It definitely didn't help that this was our first time being so far out like this, so nerves were already high. "Should we just leave?" Henry finally said in a shaken voice. After some thought, I said yes. We started packing, but that eerie feeling only felt like it was getting stronger. Just as we tossed our bags on our shoulders and stomped out the campfire, a single footstep crunched in the leaves behind me. We both swung our heads around. Without the fire, it was pitch black. It also felt like the woods were eerily quiet now. After a moment, my shaky hand reached into the side of my backpack and got out my flashlight. I pointed it out and clicked it on. Standing only 10 or 15 feet in front of me was that same guy from before with the red baseball hat. He was standing in place, already looking at us, and had a blank stare. As I held the light on him, he made that same wide smile from before. In a panic, I turned off the light and both of us sprinted to the trail. Disturbingly, I could hear multiple other footsteps chasing behind us, and some even sounding like they were running through the woods beside us. Slowly, though, they started to fade out. Eventually, it was just us two, running down the dark trail. We made it back to the car unharmed. We got in and drove away. We were both pretty shaken for a while after that. Honestly, I have no idea what was going on there. Why was anyone there at all? It's been a long time since this happened, but we haven't been out camping at all. I don't know if we ever will. This was in spring of 2021. I'm a 24-year-old male, and at the time, I'd been living away from my family while I was studying at an out-of-state college. Our school had a fairly early spring break, which meant I'd get to go home and visit my family. It was about a 2-day drive to get there, and mostly through long, boring roads. I'd take the drive over flying any day, though. I left on a Tuesday morning. I actually woke up early and hit the road well before I planned to, so I was doing great on time. I didn't have the route really planned out though. I just had a general idea of where I'd be making my first overnight stop at. I drove almost 10 hours straight, only stopping for food and gas. Around 8 p.m., I decided I'd done enough for today, and at the next gas station, I pulled up the map and looked for the nearest hotel I could stay at. I was in the middle of nowhere, but I knew there had to be something within 20 to 30 miles, at least. Thankfully, I found one. It wasn't too far, actually. The directions told me to go down the road behind the gas station, away from the highway. This road looked very old, and had very few streetlights that didn't do much for lighting up the road. And there were no cars coming down. I drove about 5 minutes, passing through a very small, old-fashioned town, and at the end of the street was the hotel. It was a small building, just as old as all the others. I parked in the empty parking lot, then grabbed my bags and walked inside. The lights were very dim, like weirdly dim, and nobody was at the counter. As I stood there, I just looked around. It was so quiet. No kids running around, or TVs on in the lobby. It was just empty. After a minute, someone finally came walking down the back hallway, and she looked startled when she saw me. She quickly walked up to the front counter and greeted me, then got me a room for the night. I thanked her and walked down the hallway. She gave me the room all the way at the end. I unlocked it and got in. I didn't even unpack anything really. I just sat on the small sofa and went on my phone for a while. The room wasn't very big or nice, which I wasn't expecting anyway. This was clearly just an older and smaller, probably family-run hotel. I remember just laying on my back on the sofa, scrolling through videos on my phone, and I guess falling asleep. I woke up abruptly to someone banging on the room door. I quickly sat up, shaken by how sudden and loud it was. My eyes looked over at the clock on the wall. It was 11 p.m. Concerned, I got up and walked over to the door, opening it. Nobody was there. I poked my head out and looked down the hallway. I stayed there for 30-ish seconds, really confused and waiting for someone to come back around or something, but the hotel was really quiet still. Everything was so off, I started second-guessing myself. Like, was the knock even at my door? It sounded like it was, and I didn't hear anyone else in any of the rooms near me, but maybe somehow it was for one of the other rooms. I went back to the couch for a little bit, then took a shower and got ready for bed. I set an alarm for 8 a.m. and fell asleep. I really wanted to sleep good tonight, because for one, I was really tired, and two, I had another long drive ahead of me. However, I woke up again in the middle of the night to someone banging on the door. I jumped up again, and this time I hurried up to the door. The whole room was dark, and I could only see the sliver of light coming out from under the door. I swung it open, but nobody was there again. I did the same thing, looking down the hall and listening. After a minute, I decided that this was too strange to not investigate a little further. Tiredly, I walked down the hallway and to the front desk. It was just as dark and quiet as it was when I first arrived here. The woman was still at the desk though. I told her someone had been banging on my door and asked if she saw anyone. The woman looked really confused and almost as if I was joking. When she realized I wasn't, she then said that I was the only guest staying here tonight. I just smiled and said okay, then started walking back to my room. I don't think it had really set in yet. Like, was I just going crazy? I got back to my room and went in. I made sure that all the locks were in place, then got in bed. I just laid there for a minute, staring at the pitch black ceiling and trying to think about what was going on, before I decided to grab my phone from the nightstand and maybe watch a video or two to get me to relax. However, right when my screen turned on, it lit up the room just enough for me to see something in the corner by the bed. I jumped up and backed away from the bed. There was someone there, standing in the dark in the back corner of the room. They were still, motionless, just watching me. My heart was burning from how hard it was pounding in my chest. I hurried over to the door. As soon as I began removing all the locks, I heard them start rushing up behind me. Their loud footsteps against the floor got closer and closer as I finally swung open the door and sprinted down the hallway. The front desk woman jumped when she saw me, but her eyes quickly darted past me. The man was running up behind me. She started calling 911, but just when the guy got into the lobby, he sprinted out the door. He didn't get into a car or anything. He just ran off. The woman explained that she had no idea who that was, and that he should not have been inside the hotel, again saying that I was the only guest checked in for the night. Police came and did a rather quick investigation. The hotel only had 2 working cameras, one in the lobby and one outside, so it wasn't all that useful. The only thing we know is that the man definitely slipped into my room while I was asking the woman about the knocking. We don't know what he wanted from me, or why he was even there at all. I got my things and left that night, obviously not wanting to stay any longer. I still have no idea what that was about, but it was definitely the most terrifying experience of my life. This was in 2016, but I remember every detail of the night, as if it had just happened. I go out in the woods just south of the town I live in, pretty frequently, at least 4 or 5 times a year. This weekend, I kind of just had that urge to get out and have some time alone, so I quickly filled my backpack and drove down to my favorite trail. I honestly don't know if it was even an actual trail that was marked on maps and all that. Nobody was ever hiking it or camping on it, so I'm really not sure if it was well known. I parked on the side of the road near the trees, got my bag out, and hiked for 2 hours to the end. This part of the woods wasn't mountainous or anything. It was very flat and just densely covered in trees. Great for a chill 1 or 2 day camping trip, but definitely nothing more than that, as it can get kinda boring. The campsite had nothing really to it. There was a few hours until sunset, so I took my time getting everything perfect and starting the campfire. I relaxed and ate some trail mix, just enjoying the warm fire and birds chirping. When the sun got lower, I tossed more sticks in. I always found it interesting how quickly the forest goes from being so alive to almost instantly getting quiet once the sun sets. I sat there and listened to the quietness for only about 25 minutes after dark before a strange sound interrupted the silence. It was music. It was coming from the distance, pretty far away, and it sounded like some old classical song. It almost sounded like an old record player. I stood up and looked in the direction it was coming from. Was there another campsite nearby? Maybe it was a group just casually playing some music, albeit really loudly. I stayed at my campsite and just listened for a while. Had to be 30 minutes at least. But what was so odd, and honestly kinda eerie, was that the song never changed. It was the same classical song on repeat, filling the void of the silent woods. I'm not one to usually care much if other campers are nearby, or having a loud bonfire party, or whatever they're doing, but this felt different. Something was off, and I didn't like it. After those 30 minutes, I decided to walk a bit closer just to see what was going on. I didn't want to creep on anyone, but just wanted to make sure it was nothing weird so I'd be able to sleep tonight. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the sound. I felt like I was walking pretty far, which made it even weirder that I could hear it from so far away. The closer I got though, and the louder the music got, something started to feel really creepy. I could tell I had goosebumps, and my heart was beating a little faster. It was then that I realized I'd only brought my flashlight. I should have brought my pocket knife or pepper spray, but I didn't even think about it. Eventually, I could tell I was getting really close. The music had to be coming from just 30 or 40 feet away, but I couldn't see anything. No bonfire or campfire or light of any kind. And then I saw it. A giant speaker sitting kind of propped up behind a tree. Nothing else was around it. I shined my flashlight everywhere, and there were no signs of anyone. I walked up to the speaker. It looked like an old one from the early 2000s, basically just a giant box with an old LCD display and worn out buttons to control it. I found the power button and turned it off. Suddenly, the forest was silent. The stark difference was eerie. Who did this? It almost felt like a trap or something, but even then, I made every excuse for it to not be. Like another camper leaving it behind on accident, or I don't know. Nothing really made sense about it, but I really didn't want to think it was the worst. I didn't stay longer than I had to. I hurried back to my campsite, feeling relieved to see my campfire and get back to what felt like the safety of my camp. However, as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake a strange feeling that loomed over me, like something was still off, but I didn't know what it was. The feeling got worse and worse until I remembered about my knife and pepper spray, thinking that if I kept them nearby, I'd feel safer. But that's when I realized what was off. Things were missing. My matches for starting fires, my cooking utensils, and both my knife and pepper spray, all just gone. My body tensed up. Someone was here. I didn't even have to think for a second longer before packing what was left. And as I did, I heard it again. The music, playing from out in the darkness of the woods. Closer though, definitely not far out where I'd found it before. I hurried, getting out of the campsite and running down to the trail. As I got further and heard the music fading out, I started to feel a little bit better. Still freaked out, but I thought whoever was out there had to be by the speakers where the music was coming from, which meant I was getting further away from them. I got about 15 minutes down the path, now just walking through the quiet forest, far away from any of the music, and that's when I spotted something ahead, laying on the dirt trail. It was my stuff. The knife, pepper spray, utensils, everything that was missing. Someone laid it out perfectly lined up in the middle of the trail. What was the catch? Before I could grab any of it, I heard a flurry of footsteps rushing behind me. I looked back, seeing nothing but darkness, so I just sprinted away, leaving it all behind. I ran for what felt like 10 whole minutes, then continued jogging/fast walking for the rest of the way. Thankfully, I got out of that forest and back to the road. I really can't say what the hell I experienced that night. It feels like somehow I barely managed to escape some psycho, almost like they were playing with their food. I haven't been back to that forest, and I never plan to. I was solo camping on a trail just an hour north of Fairbanks, Alaska, near the White Mountains mountain range. I had been at the spot, set up with my tent and everything, for 2 days already. It was just past noon, and I'd made a campfire early, sitting around it and enjoying a meal, when a man showed up. It startled me, as I hadn't seen anyone, or even really any wildlife, for the whole 2 days that I'd been out there. I also didn't hear him walking up, or even see where he came from, whether it was from the trail or just the wilderness. He looked like your typical camper though, backpack gear and everything, and he seemed kind enough. He simply asked if I knew where the cabin was. Although I'd never been to the cabin he was mentioning, I did know what he was talking about. A lot of trails around here have these public shelters, like really small cabins that you can use temporarily along your hikes. Usually they aren't really maintained well and are just on a first-come, first-served basis. During the 2 days I was at this campsite, I saw a separate thin path going into the forest that I assumed led to one of those shelters. I let the man know that if there was a cabin out here, it was probably down there. He thanked me and walked away. I didn't think much more about it. I was just surprised someone else happened to be out here as well. I tended to the fire and relaxed for the rest of the day. This was the last night I planned to stay here before heading back, so I just wanted to enjoy the scenery and calmness. It was probably 9 or 10 p.m., but around this time of year up in Alaska, the sun doesn't fully set really. It gets dark, but not pitch black like it would in most other places. The sun was at the horizon, casting a shadow over the woods, when out of the trees, I saw someone walking toward me. As they got closer, I saw it was the camper from earlier. I was rightfully confused why he was here, but he explained right away that he couldn't find the shelter. I said maybe there wasn't one, I really didn't know. But the man corrected himself, saying he never found the trail that I was talking about, and was hoping I'd show him to it. I thought it was strange he was gone for so long, if he never found the trail. Like, why was he coming back hours later? What was he doing for that whole time, if not staying in the shelter? I initially just tried to explain again where the trail was, but he was kind of set on having me lead the way. He sorta guilt-tripped me, saying he didn't have a tent and was relying on that shelter for the night. I felt bad, and even though I didn't want to, and found this whole thing a little bit odd, I decided I'd just take him to the path. It wasn't far anyway. I tossed my bag over my shoulders and started leading him there. Where I was sure I'd seen it was maybe a 10-minute walk through the forest. The whole walk there, the guy was pretty quiet. We both just walked without talking much. It felt like something had changed. 10 minutes later, though, I found the trail. It was exactly where I said it was. Like, there was no way he could have missed it. And even weirder, I could actually see the shelter far down toward the end of it. Sure, it was far, and trees were blocking a good portion of it, but there's just no way he didn't find it from the directions I gave him. We walked a little closer, but the man didn't seem satisfied. I was expecting a thank you or something, but instead, he said this wasn't the right cabin. I didn't know what he meant. We kept walking, pretty much going right up to the cabin. It definitely didn't look in good shape, but that's always the risk you take with these sort of public shelters. You really should never rely on them. This one looked worse than most, with broken windows, moldy wood, and just overall like it'd been deserted for years. I realized as I was looking at it, the man had gone quiet. I turned around. He had stopped walking, standing maybe 10 feet from me and holding out a knife. His face was stiff, and his eyes had a dead stare. He told me in a monotone and emotionless voice to go in. I tried to ask what the hell he was doing, but he told me again, without answering, to go inside the cabin. My adrenaline was flowing. I was angry that he'd taken advantage of me being helpful, but also scared shitless, knowing that I was alone with him out here. I decided going into the cabin was probably the worst option in this case. There was still some distance between us, so I dropped my bag and started running. Weirdly, I didn't hear him chase me. I looked back once I got further into the woods, and he was still just standing there, holding the knife and staring at me. After I got further into the forest, I found a good place to hide, then stayed there for a while, probably 30 minutes. I hoped that was enough time for the guy to leave. Then, in the cover of the dark, I quietly moved through the trees and back to where the shelter was. The man was gone, or at least not standing outside of the cabin like he was before. But my bag was gone too. I thought I was being smart by dropping it, so I'd be able to run away faster. But since he didn't chase me, now I felt like maybe it was a bad decision. I had basically everything in that bag. My phone, wallet, keys, literally everything. I quietly left the area and went back toward my campsite. I could feel my heart beating faster as I got closer, just sensing that I wasn't alone still. Then I saw it. The bright glow of a campfire burning right in the middle of my campsite. I thought by now it would have burned out. I walked a little closer, seeing my tent was still up, and from what I could see, the man was nowhere around. It was just the near silent woods with the quiet crackling fire. But then I saw my bag. It was sitting right in the middle of the campsite. Part of me really wanted to run up and grab it, but I also knew this was extremely suspicious. Why'd he bring it back? He must have known I was going to go back to the cabin for my bag, and after not finding it, I'd then go back to the campsite. Even knowing all that, and that this had to be too good to be true, I was still about to run up and snatch it, when all of a sudden, the man appeared. He casually walked out of the darkness behind the campfire, tossing in some more sticks, and then sitting down. I could hear him humming to himself too, like he was relaxed and just waiting. Fuck that. I turned around and found the main trail, and hiked through the dark all the way back to the road. It took me hours to flag down a car who was willing to help me. I then notified police, and they went out to the forest with rangers in the morning, only to find nothing. All my stuff was gone, as if it were never there. Even the stones from the campfire were moved and thrown back into the forest, like they were trying to cover up that it was ever even a campsite. The rangers also informed me that the cabin out there was discontinued, which just meant that no rangers were taking care of it or servicing it anymore. That encounter had me really uneasy for a long time. I couldn't trust anyone. I've gotten better over time, but I can't help myself from thinking about what might have happened if I'd gone into that deserted shelter or had tried to get my bag. I was likely one bad decision away from never leaving those woods. This happened just 2 weeks ago on a backpacking trip I was on, the first one of the summer for me. As far as I was aware, I was going on a very routine backpacking trip through a trail in northeastern Wyoming. The trail was a 2-day hike there and a 2-day hike back the same way. I'd done a ton of trails similar to this, so I went into it thinking it'd just be a typical few days. I parked at the empty trailhead and started walking. First few hours went well. The route was quiet, and I felt like I was making good time. I only had 3 miles left before I'd reach the first campsite, which I'd actually just be passing through and going straight to the next one, 2 miles further, which would be where I'd camp at for that night. Feeling a bit hungry and finding a nice spot for a break, I sat against a tree on the side of the trail and pulled out a snack. I was just taking a breather, only wanting to eat real quick and then get back to walking. But as I sat there, I happened to look up and see something kind of creepy. There was a guy standing in the woods off the other side of the trail, and he was staring at me. Not walking or anything, just staring. I had no idea how long he'd been there for. Almost as soon as I made eye contact with him, he lifted his hand and did this really strange wave, like he was trying to show he was friendly, but the wave was almost robotic. It was just really strange looking and creepy, especially with him standing out there and staring at me. I decided to just stand up and continue down the trail. I was sure he was up to nothing, but I figured it was best to leave anyway. I didn't know why he was off the trail or what he was doing, and as long as I wasn't around him, I didn't care. Those next 3 miles were a little more difficult than I expected, taking me almost 2 hours before I reached the campsite. Like I said, this was the one I was just passing through, but with my break being cut short earlier, I decided to use this as a chance to make a bigger meal and take a longer break before making the final trek to my actual camp for the night. I set my backpack down and took out my mini propane cooker to heat up some water and make my freeze-dried food. I got it to a boil and poured it in, and as I was just waiting for it to cook, I heard footsteps coming down the trail. I looked over. It was the same man I'd seen in the woods. He had short black hair, a medium beard, and a gray flannel with blue jeans, and he looked like he was maybe in his mid-30s to early 40s. As he walked up, I noticed he had a grin on his face, which I assume was supposed to seem friendly, but it definitely didn't. He must have started walking here right after I did, for him to get here so soon. As he walked up, he said hello and started small talk, asking about the hike and whatever. I gave short answers, hoping he'd continue along the trail, but my heart sank when he came right up next to me and sat down. He was acting way too friendly, to the point where it felt like he was being aggressively friendly, like there was no way he was genuine. He was really starting to creep me out. I tried to eat my meal quickly, but the guy kept asking me questions about it. At one point, he was jokingly mocking me for eating a quote, homeless meal, and said I needed better nutrition. He tried handing me an opened protein bar. I kid you not, he pulled it out of his backpack, and the wrapper was already opened, but no bites or anything were taken out of it. I turned it down, obviously, but he was being really pushy about it. Eventually, he gave up though, saying that he was going to be staying the night at this campsite too, so he will give it to me later when I'm hungry. Hearing that was an instant relief. He was staying at this campsite. All I had to do was get out of here. I finished eating, then said my friend was waiting for me at the next campsite, so I had to go. The guy held his smile, but I could tell there was nothing behind it. His whole face was flat. He was just holding this ingenuous smile, and it was really creepy. I walked away, checking back a few times to make sure he didn't follow. I don't know what was up with that guy. Maybe he was just some harmless guy wanting to have a chat, but my gut told me to get away, so that's what I did. Another couple hours later, I made it to my camp for the night. The sun was already setting, so it was getting pretty dark, and although I was tired, something told me to wait to set up my tent or really unpack anything until later, just in case I had to make a quick exit. Thank God I did, because not 10 minutes later again, I heard those same footsteps crunching on the leaves down the trail. A moment later, the man showed up holding that creepy grin that he had before. It definitely wasn't smart of me, but immediately when I saw him, I got really mad. I felt like I'd done everything to get away from this guy, and now I was pissed. He said he was staying at the other camp, so what the hell was he doing here? Stupidly, I straight up asked if he was following me, and I made it clear by the tone of my voice that I was serious. But the guy just jokingly laughed and said, "Yeah, I'm following you," like he was being sarcastic. He still had that stupid, creepy smile across his face. He started asking if I was hungry after all that walking, but I quickly grabbed my bag and ignored him, walking back the way I came. Again, I didn't see him immediately follow me, but I knew better than to trust that. I passed the previous camp, exhausted, but continued until I couldn't anymore. I was maybe a mile past the first camp. I moved off the trail. Honestly, I'm not sure how far off I even went, probably 200 to 300 feet, then discreetly set up my tent. I left almost everything still in my backpack, just in case, then laid down and tried to sleep. Even with this really disturbing situation, I was so exhausted that I fell asleep surprisingly quickly. But in the middle of the night, my eyes shot open. I could hear footsteps crunching on the leaves right from where the trail was. It had to be him again, walking through the woods in the middle of the night, looking for me. The footsteps got closer, but then they started to fade out, moving further down the trail. He didn't see me. I waited until sunrise, then booked it back to my car. Thankfully, I never ran into him again. I don't know where he went after that. Honestly, I think I was disturbingly close to having something really horrifying happen. My encounter with that strange man could have been really bad, as I think he had some pretty nasty intentions, especially the more I think about the protein bar he tried to give me, and just the whole situation. It still makes me sick to think about.